Hello and welcome to my webcast. My name is Eric Bowers. My artist name is The Golden Repair. And thank you to all my patrons who support my work as The Golden Repair. Today I have Mia Kalef with me. Hello, Mia.
Hello, Eric.
Mia and I are friends. And Mia is also a therapist, author, and ceremonialist dedicated to seeing the soul of things. She practiced as a chiropractor for 18 years and has been a cranial sacral therapist for 25 years. She mentors health professionals in bringing pre-birth and birth awareness to their work and gives divinations in the Dagara tradition of West and Central Africa. And you are living on Denman Island now, where you hold retreats, but you also travel internationally to do your work. How is it on Denman Island? You said it's quite stormy there right now?
Oh, it's been storming for about 24 hours. It's so exciting. Trees are swaying, the brook is filling with water. It's quite a cacophony of nature.
Yeah. Are you getting down to the ocean? Is there some pretty good action on the ocean there too?
Yeah, I felt like I was actually in Hawaii minus the temperature because it was rolling in. It was beautiful, beautiful fresh air.
Well, I'm coming to visit you soon, so I look forward to that. I hope I get to see some of that wild ocean action.
Yeah, that'll be great.
I love to start off with people and that I'm interviewing and hearing a little bit about their upbringing, just to build some context and personal connection. So can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what were your passions and interests as a young girl?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Calgary, Canada, just east of the Rockies, and I loved sports. I loved anything to do with movement, but really pushing the body.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have chosen it myself, but I also took a lot of dance. But my mother was a dancer and a choreographer. And so both my brother and I were put in ballet and jazz growing up, and I protested wildly, but I'm sure it was also good for me. But yeah, athletics, building things, just had a lot of curiosity and zest for life as a kid.
Yeah. And you were quite the rower. Do I remember that right? In university, you were on the rowing team. And...
Actually, in high school.
In high school.
My crew actually won the nationals in Canada, and we qualified for the Worlds.
Oh, wow.
And it just happened to be that year they weren't sending a crew from Canada. Otherwise, we would have gone to Spain in the summer and raced for Canada, which would have been spectacular. But by the time the next year rolled around before university, I had a back injury, which really led me to all my healing work. So I had to quit that fairly young.
Okay. Yeah. I used to be a river guide. I loved rowing. I just loved the full body, use, and the expression of most of your muscles and, the full extension. And I never...
Yeah, you would have made a great rower with your height.
Yeah. And abnormally long arms. I was a pretty good rower. So
look at you now. What happened?
There's still hope. So you had a back injury that inspired you to get into becoming a chiropractor? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I was 17 and I was racing at the Canada Games that summer. And if you ever look at the photos from that summer of the women I was rowing with, I was about 1.5 feet shorter than all of them. So I was already at a disadvantage, just not being of the full size of a rower. And one day I didn't get out of the boat. I couldn't walk. And that went on for a while. Even when we flew back home, I had to lie on the floor of the plane. And so I got passed around, to all the different health professionals there were. And, I saw a chiropractor, I saw a bone setter, traditional bone setter, a physiotherapist, rheumatologist, wow, and sports medicine specialist, and no one could tell me what was wrong. And this was the days, this dates me, but it was before the days of these terms like fibromyalgia, where, there were these unexplainable tissue irritations. So all they said to me at 17 was, we don't know what's wrong with you. This could be with you for the rest of your life, or it could one day leave you, and we don't know. And it just seemed crazy to me because I didn't look the part of a sick person.
Right.
So it set me on my path of curiosity and trying to get to the bottom of it.
So you couldn't walk, or you couldn't stand up because of pain or tiredness?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Probably both. Probably both. Okay. But no, I couldn't. It was so painful. I was carried down the dock and carried for a few days. Yeah.
Wow. And how did you heal from that?
It's funny. I really remember this time in my life as being very special. I would say it was the first time I ever went inside myself, ever became introspective, at least to my knowledge. Because, there were all my friends and even my boyfriend at the time continuing on in their rowing paths and hanging out together and training. And I just had to sit in my room during practice times. And my coach was smart. I mean, I begged her to let me continue once I was able to move again. But she said, there's no way they're letting me back on the boat. So I remember just, sitting there and listening to music. I really was into like Pink Floyd's most recent album at the time, and just thinking really deeply about what was happening and dealing with the grief of it, as well as moving very deeply into sensing my body and how I could relax it, like, stretching and swimming and much more contemplative ways of being than what I was used to. So it was a really interesting time in terms of growth.
And you're about 18, 19 then? Or?
I was 17, 17, 18. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Was it, I mean, it sounds like you're making the best of it and growing through it, but was it also depressing or just really frustrating to have to give up something you love so much?
Yeah, it was. I wouldn't say I was depressed because I was quite proactive in this path of trying to get to the bottom of it, but I was very lonely. Yeah. I was very lonely. People were used to me being off somewhere. So how it is in high school, everyone has their groups of friends. So everyone was busy doing what they were doing, and they didn't know I was actually sitting around kind of missing my life. But I grew this resilience of, being alone with myself. I remember feeling like something was emerging inside me that was stronger than I knew was there before. Huh. But I was rehabbing actively too. I was, wearing sneakers around all the time. And in high school in those days, that wasn't cool. Right. I was just trying to cushion as much of the stress in my body. Right. And then I think I started to just cope with the pain. But by the time I was in university, it wasn't bearable. And that's when I felt like I got more serious about, what is this about? Uh-huh. Not only why is it there, but what is this about? What's at the root of it? Because it wasn't just rowing anymore. It was something was lingering for a reason.
And so how did you explore? What was it about?
I was introduced to a chiropractor, and I'd already lost faith in chiropractic, ironically, by that time, because it hadn't worked for me. Right. In fact, I'd got worse earlier in high school. But I met a chiropractor who had a very unique perspective. He was doing a type of muscle testing that tested our developmental motor patterns, and it was very intriguing. And although I wasn't necessarily getting better, I could tell that he had a bit of a genius to him. So I was encouraged. And then one day he suggested, well, why don't you come for an appointment, like a double appointment, and we'll do a visualization next time. And I thought, oh God, what's going to happen? Uh-huh. What terrible things are going to come out of me? Like intuitively, I was just scared. Right. But when I went into the office that day, and all we did is he had me breathe while he was working on some of my intercostal muscles, just stretching them out, just opening up my breathing. And I write about this in my newest book, in the intro, that I was quite surprised that eventually I started to see this image of an embryo or a fetus in my body. Huh. And I realized that it was me. And all of a sudden I was having tears come to my eyes. And I was only 19. I had no idea what body-mind medicine was. No one had pointed me in this direction before, but the pain started to go away as soon as I wept. And my light bulbs turned on. I was so excited. I thought, holy, like nobody ever told you that physical pain could be caused by emotional stagnation. And I got really inspired, and then just started gobbling like everything I could to read about somatization and hypochondriasis, and basically how does it work that the psyche gets involved in the body. Yeah. So that was a fun time, actually, even though it was a growth time and difficult. My mind was just expanding really rapidly with this awareness that it was possible to heal this way.
So you were visualizing and or tuning into your body, and you had an image of yourself in utero. Is that what you said?
I guess it was, yeah. I'm not even sure to this day, but I'm pretty sure it was an image of me being in the womb. I didn't follow it further, like not like today where, we know how to come up with a traumatic image or a therapeutic image and then work with it until it resolves and you come out the other side with some kind of perhaps understanding. It wasn't quite so clear like that. It was more the connection was made that there's an emotional basis to pain.
Right.
And I decided that day that that's what I wanted to do with my life. Just figure out how that works and do it. Do it with people.
You reminded me, I forgot to mention your books in my intro. So your latest one is called It's Never Too Late. I'm going to just type that in. And your one before that is The Secret Life of Babies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to get to those a little bit later, but I just thought I put those up. The Secret Life of Babies. Having trouble spelling babies. There we go. Kalef. And welcome to a listener who's with us. If you have any questions at any time, please just type them into the comment section there. So you went forward with this passion to understand the mind, body, emotional connection. And that took you into becoming a chiropractor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of like to say that I went into chiropractic wanting to have a license to explore other things.
I see.
And I naively or innocently went into the school thinking they were going to talk about that and teach about that. And I kept trying to ask questions, and I was met with resistance by various, professors, until one day a friend came to me and she said, "We're all going to go study craniosacral therapy," which was like outside the school. Yeah. "Do you want to come?" And something just went, yeah, I do want to come, because I always said no to pretty much every other extracurricular course because it seemed like a distraction from what I was interested in. And then it was born. I realized there was a way in to working with the whole person through the body.
Huh. So that was when you were studying to become a chiropractor, you were taking extracurricular courses in craniosacral therapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there was a wonderful blessing for us at the time. My first real mentor, Dr. Ron King, who he began his practice in New Zealand, where it was actually very commonplace to give craniosacral to babies and adults, like it was part of the scope of practice. He was our overseeing clinician. And once he found out that about 8 of us had started studying this work, he would take us and give us tutorials in his office and really help us build our intuitive skills.
Oh, wonderful.
So I have him to thank for really amplifying the value of that work in my life.
Yeah.
I'm indebted to him for sure.
And craniosacral is getting more and more known out there, but not as well known as chiropractic practices. So could you say, briefly, what is craniosacral therapy?
Sure. I can try. It seems to change all the time, depending on how long you work with people and what comes up. But technically, there are two main branches of craniosacral therapy. Both of them grew out of osteopathy.
Okay.
They're the two different branches. One of them works more with what are the structures in the body that are technically taught to be immobile that actually do move, and how can you move them so you can restore health to them. So that means the bones in the head, bones of the pelvis, and all sorts of other tissues and fluids in the body. And then the other type of craniosacral work is called biodynamic, and that practice is more focused on different energetic fluctuations that are palpable in the body, around the body, and in different levels of the tissues. And it's a bit, they're both intuitive, but I would say the biodynamic requires, in some ways, a bit more of a subtle sense than the structural work. I practice a blend of both. The biodynamic practitioners would argue that structural work has no place in cranial work, but I would say that both are necessary. I'm not sure that that explains much, but a treatment basically looks like, somewhere between 50 minutes and an hour and a half, lying on something like a massage table, and the practitioner will try to assess where in your body the restrictions are. And oftentimes it's not to do with where things hurt. It has to do with perhaps where your body is taking the compensation of what hurts, or it hurts because it's compensating for where it's actually restricted. And then they go about harmonizing with your own healing abilities and hoping to bring the vitality back to the structures that are stuck.
You broke up the last part. They go about, can you finish that part?
Restoring vitality to the structures that seem stuck.
Okay. And how does that happen?
Magic. It's a long story how it happens.
All right.
Yeah, I'd say
my sister studied biodynamic craniosacral therapy, so I know a little bit from her. Isn't there a sense of the therapist, the craniosacral therapist in biodynamic craniosacral therapy, they hold a resourced space for the client, patient to be able to rest into, so to speak, so that their nervous system and so on can. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think it's probably true across the healing arts. Even a psychologist would need to anchor themselves in some sort of coherence in order to bring about the possibility of coherence in the relationship.
Right.
So, a sacral therapist, there are many stances and techniques and sort of states that craniosacral therapists can invoke in themselves to raise the probability that the health will enter the room for both of them, that cause the change that patient is looking for. It goes from something that could be very broad, like just holding the nature of health of the universe, or the nature of health of the life that gives us life. They call it the breath of life. Or it could be as focused as the fascia around an artery that has contracted and is causing nausea or vertigo, and you are applying a state of coherence to the quality, the vibration of that fascia. So it can be big and very specific.
Right. Yeah, I've experienced a little bit of it, and it's I love the subtlety and the sense of attunement. For me, really tuning into my own body with the support of the therapist, and So
and you do healing work like that too, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, when I'm working with clients, I'm very much trying to hold a place of resource so that they can regulate the stresses that are coming up for them, and titrate into
Would
more resource places together. So how did you go from there to working with pre-birth and birth?
Well, I like to say they made me do it. Like, sometimes I didn't say this at my book launch where you were there last week, but it's a funny story. There was this psychic.
All right.
Her name is Consuelo, and I got introduced to her when I was much younger, and I would go and see her, like once or twice a year, just to see what she knew about me. And she was actually a really, really eclectic, brilliant, entertaining woman. And she was actually a forensic specialist for the RCMP,
Okay.
like they would call her to find out what had happened to missing people. So one day she told me that I would be working with families regarding their children and about healthy parenting and babies. And I thought she was crazy.
How old are you now? Where are you in your career?
I was like 29,
Okay.
29 or so.
Yeah.
And it had never occurred to me
Yeah.
to do that, even though craniosacral therapy is really well designed for working with babies and children. I just considered it a part of the scope of my entire practice.
Yeah.
And I was still a chiropractor at the time too. And I just put it aside. You know how when you get a reading, you take what you want, then you pretend you didn't hear the rest. I don't know why I was so aversive to it, because it's not a bad thing, really. It's quite lovely.
Yeah.
And then I was studying craniosacral therapy, and I met a teacher who I saw a transformation in her from the last time I studied with her to the next time I studied with her. And it was so compelling. She looked like a completely different person. Right. She was infinitely more approachable and infinitely more beautiful too, radiant. Yeah. And she told us what she'd been doing. And I said, oh my God, I've got to take that for myself, yeah. Never mind for. But by the time I got introduced to that work, which was through Ray Castellino, I came home just committed to doing that work in my practice too. I felt it was just so exciting and sophisticated and nuanced, and a real breakthrough in terms of what was possible for people. So it took me a while to grow into it, but I'm still growing into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how that happened. It was serendipitous.
Yeah. Wow. So my understanding of that work is that our experience in utero and then at birth can really set up some patterns for how we show up in our life, how we show up in relationships. And I would say, in my way of phrasing it, that it's through implicit memory, through unconscious memory, we store our experiences. As I think implicit memory comes on in the last trimester of birth. So I know there are other types of memory I've heard of, but in terms of the unconscious or implicit memory, what I've heard is the last trimester of birth. And so we are already starting to store our bodily experience, our emotional experience, our sensations, and form unconscious beliefs and so on. And all of that gets carried forward. Is that resonating with for you, or is there more you want to add to that, or a different way of saying it?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely true. We're sitting in there as the walls are getting tighter and we're starting to listen, like what's going on out there. We're kind of getting a sense that there is an out there. We are learning as fast as we can about out there so that we're going to be able to get on out there.
Right.
And there's this very intelligent, adaptive habit we have, which is radical fast learning, all through the embryonic and fetal period and periods, and especially at birth, because our mammalian, I don't know if you want to call them cousins, they aren't as protected as we are, and it's just wise to be able to kind of get ready to. You need to anticipate what's out there if you're going to get by.
Right.
So we're so smart. We're picking it all up. And it makes sense that we would have both the brain structures to support that learning by the time the third, even the second trimester, actually, the limbic system is starting to develop in the second trimester. And even then, implicit memory is coming online.
Okay.
With smell and sound and even a little bit of vision, more like light. But certainly like the emotional chemicals that are in our mother's bloodstream are informing us right from the get-go.
Right.
But then there's a whole more subtle way of learning that's going on even before. And it's hard to describe what those organs of perception are because we don't necessarily have the brain architecture to support memory, but we are having memory. So in my first book, The Secret Life of Babies, I have a whole section about how consciousness precedes the brain architecture that supports it, that's meant to support it. And we have people all the time having memories in a regress state of conception, of the first few weeks after conception, what it was like coming into relationship with the mother's uterine wall for the first time. What was it like for the first time to take home and to grow roots? And what did that dynamic go like? Or even earlier, what was it like to navigate the energetic fields of the family coming into this world? What did you already have a sense of that you needed to kind of rest into or dodge or morph around? And how did you accommodate right from the get-go? So there's, I go through every stage of early embryonic development in my newest book, because I think people don't realize how imprinted we are by even those first few weeks. And it's both exciting because there's so much room for healing and reclaiming things that got missed. It's also kind of freaky because, we don't have control over that period. We're so vulnerable, and most parents don't even realize they're pregnant and inadvertently might have been in situations that had they known, they might have avoided.
Right.
So it's a pretty rich world, that early bit.
Is there anything you can say about how memory is stored that, before the limbic system's coming online?
I don't know how it gets stored, but I used to think, I was thinking of this image when you first started describing memory. I think of it as, if cells move at a certain rhythm, let's just say like all cells are breathing, all cells have a metabolic, let's just say, function where they're cleansing, they're metabolizing, there's a rhythm to that. And it has a particular interval and speed and amplitude. And that's I think, a kind of mimicry. So if you come into an environment that has a sort of a medium that supports a well-resourced metabolic behavior for a cell, that cell is going to take on its nature in its full form. So it may probably go a little slower, but robustly. And if you bring a cell into a medium that is overcharged or overstimulated, that cell, in order to exist in that medium, will match as best it can so that it can sustain relationship in that medium, to sustain vitality and health. And that might have a different look to it, like ratchety or quicker. I'm just making up possibilities. And equally, if there's a medium that's under-resourced in terms of lacking vitality, there could be like a sluggishness or slowness or an intermittent expression of life force. So I think we pick up rhythm, and we pick up amplitude, and we pick up electric vibrational signals, and begin to mimic them and behave as them so that we can be sane enough to continue growing and thriving together, because we don't grow it alone, we grow together with others around us. So I think that we mimic those rhythms and sequences, because if you start with one cell, all of a sudden within 48 hours, you're, like a couple hundred cells, and within a few days, you're several hundred cells. And so there's a sequence to that. There's one becomes many, and that's how you may sequence in your own body later. It's a foundational building block for how you may later grow an organ, or how you may later grow your psyche. So everything that happens in a small way will kind of scale up or fractal up to eventually how you gesture your life. And you're growing. I said a lot in a very short time there. It's I didn't know how long you wanted to spend on that, so I was trying to make it succinct.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by memory, so I appreciate the thoroughness of the answer. It sounds like you're saying there's a,
and then there's
it sounds like you're saying that there's a mimicry, that there's the memories happening through mimicry or through a resonance with the quality of rhythm that's around in the mother.
Yeah. And the mother, her village, her environment, her nutrition, her ancestry, not to mention your own soul's ancestry, if you believe in that kind of thing, and all sorts of things that we bring in with us. And there's an interesting conversation I've just been having with a colleague in the Netherlands, John Turner. He's a big writer and researcher. He has an institute called the Whole Self Institute, worth checking out. Okay. He says that everybody he's worked with that's been in a regressed state and connecting with where their consciousness was in relationship to their body at that very early time, like conception, up to about 3 weeks. He says every single person experiences their bodies from the outside, and that consciousness is actually hovering around the cellular bodies. I want to kind of massage that out with him, because I've experienced otherwise, but yeah, I mean, it's really leading edge. Like, we're all just kind of discovering it.
So I'd like to shift now to the experiences that happen pre-birth and birth and how they affect our lives, and how we can tell. I have one idea that I don't know where it came from, but that a lot of the stressful, traumatic events throughout our lives are patterned right from birth, that they are, sort of, there's a pattern that's somehow tied back to some of our trauma at birth and pre-birth. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. How have you experienced that?
Well, for example, I had a very fast birth. I've heard my mom say many times how fast and easy it was for her. And that she didn't feel much pain, partly because she learned some sort of hypnosis, self-hypnosis. So what I think is, for me, during important transitions and so on, there's an anxiety, there's a more difficult time feeling connected with whomever I'm with. And
like, it all happened too quickly for you to keep up with what changes.
That would be a good way to put it, yeah. And to feel connected with the important person, in that case, my mother.
Right. Yeah, there's some people like to say that there's 5 stages to the birth, and maybe 5 stages to all sequences, which would be 1, the anticipation, the intention that's building that you're going to be born. And what's that all like for your mom, your parents, your community? How's that setting up from the position you're getting into to the position they're getting into? Then there's the initiation. Like, how does birth start? How do you enter the pelvis? And depending on the position you're in, that can go really well. It can go smoothly, or it can be protracted and uncomfortable. Sometimes babies, aren't coming in straight, due to various multitudes of reasons. Yeah. And that can be stressful for the neck and stressful. You'll see 3-day, sometimes early labors, things like that, 2 days sometimes. And then there's, okay, it's on, like birth is happening and you're into the intense phases of it. And how are you traveling through the pelvis? What's that like? How is your mother's pelvis built? How does she accommodate the natural movements you're going to make? And then how are you exiting the pelvis? Are you facing this direction, that direction? Is the cord in the way? What's been going on? Has your mother been given drugs to support her, or because the hospital can't support her in other ways? Right. Or, there's a variety of dynamics. And then the last stage is, how are you received? Like, how do you come together and make the final contact, which would be to nurse and consume colostrum and promotion? What's that like? So they say that all of those stages really count, and each of them has their own personality, and that we can recapitulate or replay every one of those stages in how we do anything, like you were saying. So it's an intriguing thing to look at in our lives. Like if you're, working on a project, and do you love the beginning but hate the end? Do you enjoy the middle, but it's hard to get started? Where's your happy place and where's the not so happy place? Or, it's usually a bit of a replay. Yeah. I think it is like breadcrumbs that have been left back to the story. Even if you've never been told, you can kind of start to guess how it might have gone.
So can you say more about how a person might start to look at their life in relationship to what their birth experience and pre-birth experiences were?
Well, I think just like that, if you want to take any aspect of your life, usually people are the most motivated around the parts that aren't going the way they want. Yeah. So that's usually a great place to start. And, start to use phrases to describe it. I mean, some people will have these figures of speech, like, I'm always getting stuck at this stage of the da-da-da, or I find like I just gap out or fog out when I need to do. Or the person that I'm with always leaves me, there's these stock phrases that are like familiar because you've been reliving them. And I think when you start to write them down, it starts to give you a sense of like the voice inside that's never really had a chance to be empathized with from even way, way back. And it's totally possible that it's from later in life, but chances are it starts pretty early. So you can start looking at what are the habits, what are the themes, and sometimes getting your birth story either from someone who was there or the hospital you were born in or the midwife you were with can give you one camera angle of your birth, but inevitably your own camera angle of it is the one that's the most important, because a lot of times people don't know what's happening with you when you're making your way. There's nobody's, unless you have a shaman there that speaks infant, you're not getting the full report all the time. But a lot of people look back at hospital records and they discover, oh my gosh, at 12 a.m. my mom was given this drug, and oh my God, that's the time of night that when I'm up, I feel like this terrible feeling. Or, I'll ask mothers when I'm working with them and their babies, what time of day is the baby doing this, and this? And she'll be like, oh, it's always like at 10 to 11 p.m. And I said, where were you in the birth at that time? She goes, well, that was when we were just transferring to the hospital or whatever it was. So it's fascinating to look at our rhythms and our phrases, figures of speech. And then, if you're not with a practitioner, which is most of the time, who can help you with that. Like, I've written this book for in between sessions when you're on your own and you really want a resource to work with. You can start a dialogue with the early places in yourself. You can actually imagine that you as a prenate, as a birthing baby, and as a newborn were sentient. You knew what was happening to you, and you can actually ask that place in you to come forward with feelings, words, gestures. And then usually because they're nonverbal and they're usually physical feelings, what I do with myself, I do this a lot with myself, is I just try to match what my body's trying to do and give myself a resourced container. Like I try to pretend I'm the good mother, I'm the good doctor, I'm the good father, I'm the good hospital or midwife. Yeah. And I try to be all those things while I'm trying to be
I do that too.
The young Yeah, we have something in common there. And that can be very effective. It can also end up, maybe you know this too, it can end up recreating the loneliness or the under-resourced state because it's a lot to try to do at once. But find good friends or come to a workshop and do it with a group of people who can really hold you. But the book takes you through each stage and it gives you a clue of what kinds of common interventions and common interruptions might be affecting you and what those effects look like in you today, right. Like kind of matching them up.
Yeah. It's just popped into my head. I don't really know a lot more about my birth story, particularly around how I was received. I assume I was well received, but one of the highlights of my life that stands out is when I was doing a particular training in nonviolent communication. And there was an evening where we were just having fun, doing some drumming and dancing, because we'd been together a few days. So there was a bond building with the group. And the walls of the room were glass, so you could see when someone was coming to enter the room. And we spontaneously just started giving a huge standing ovation. We were all standing anyway, but when someone would walk in the room, we would just start clapping, with joy and, genuine, big, huge round of applause for whoever walked in the room. And then it became this whole pattern, like everyone wanted to experience it. And so everyone would go out and they would come back in and everyone would give a huge, and I remember how great that felt. And just the level of joy in the room was like few other times in my life. That's why it stands out. And it makes me think how many people didn't get to have a full, and what the other part of it is, it was a group of people. It was a sense of a community. And a lot of births now, at least in my time, we're in a hospital and with strangers and who knows who's there or what. But yeah, I know in your work, there's a huge component of community and tradition and the connection to the land, all of it, welcoming a child.
Yeah, most of us certainly weren't welcomed in like that at birth, but even thinking about conception, there could be a lot of ritual in certain cultures around, the village deciding they are ready for this one to come and pledging their support to the conceiving parents and to the mother especially, so she knows that not only can she later do the birth, but she can be held and protected throughout the pregnancy, but that the soul knows they're coming from somewhere amazing. Probably we're coming here for love, we're coming here to be known. So I think that experience just sounds ideal. And some people in that situation would shy away too if their conception or the lack of acknowledgement at birth was strong enough. It would kind of push up against that memory and make them not able to receive it necessarily. So it might be a sign that it was kind of natural enough that you all could get into it, or it was a healing for everyone.
Well, it's a good point. I'm not sure everybody experienced it. I wasn't tracking that closely, so there may have been people who didn't feel comfortable. But
you never know. It's always a bit of everything.
I mean, it's one of the edgiest places for people to receive full on appreciation. But by that time, we were fairly close as a group.
Yeah, that sounds neat. That's another place to look too. How do you feel when you're anticipating your birthday
Right.
and the day of,
Right.
and what kinds of like, how do you wrestle with it or not?
Yeah.
Or like some people are unabashedly so excited it's their birthday and just, well, they bring it
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
bring on the love. And other people really don't know how to set up that sort of celebration for themselves and feel like they shouldn't ask. And, there's all sorts of variety.
Hmm. Are you willing to share more about your process of exploring your birth and pre-birth?
Sure. I'm resourcing myself. Water. So I always was told that I was born with the use of forceps.
Okay.
I always knew that. And it didn't really mean much to me. It just was a story, and I was just happy that I had a story of my birth. There were other positive aspects, like my maternal grandfather happened to be in the city, and he was at the hospital, and he was so excited, and he was there. And so there were, everyone has their story, and most people don't question it. So um, when I don't remember the first time I actually had this experience, but by the time I was an adult, I would get, like, on the eve of a big deal, like on the eve of a graduation, or I was going to do a presentation. I even get a little bit of a in my body just saying it
Right.
now. I would I would have pain in my
Right.
head, and it wasn't just pain. It was the kind of, like, I felt like someone had taken a hammer and, like, just dislocated part of myself. And I would also feel like I was going to die beforehand.
So
And I also felt like I was
you're
going to
going to
die
die. Okay.
before. Yeah. And it's not uncommon to get nervous, like when you're doing public
Yeah.
speaking. Like, I think there's a certain amount of nerves that come with big
Yeah.
events. But it was so unsavory. I never put it together to do with my birth. But by the time I started getting into this work, or even just into craniosacral, I put it together that, yes, I'm birthing myself anew each time I come out into the world with
Right.
something that's deep from my soul. And what do? I recreate the circumstances. Now, I don't know if the external circumstances would really get recreated, but certainly internally, I was believing they were true. So when I started working on it, I haven't really thought through the timeline of this because it's almost been some of the least of my stories. But oh yeah, I remember in a workshop similar to the ones I give now, I was redoing my birth. That's just what my body wanted to do. It was my turn to have my session, and before I knew it, there I was talking about this feeling of how I wanted to come out the way I really am. And before I knew it, my body was doing all these movements that were reminiscent of a birth sequence. And there I was with people all around me, like pushing on my pelvis, squeezing my shoulders, like really recreating the intensity of a womb,
Right.
birthing womb. And I remember lying on my side and getting this deep, deep awareness that, yes, I got stuck. So I can see why the doctors wanted to help me, even though the forceps were way too rough for me. But it was that my mom was tired. Her womb was tired. And that we could have done it if someone had understood the kind of morale lifting she needed
Right.
and the kind of contact she needed. I really felt like if her pelvis and her being could have been reinforced, we would have had the potency and the momentum to pick up and get through this together. That I wasn't truly stuck. We were just bogged down.
Yeah.
And it was a huge revelation and so much compassion for my mother too, because when you start doing things to moms and babies when they're just trying to do what they're doing, you get in between them, and that thing that gets in between them can stay with them. And my mom and I have always had barriers to connecting. And I think it started, well, I don't think it started there, but it was a major moment where we missed each other because she wasn't getting what she needed. And I was also born posterior, or sunny side up, they call it, where babies are supposed to come out sort of facing the ground. I was facing up to the sky. And I realized that's not even a pathology. Like they talk about that as being bad. And I was like, no, it's just another way to come. So I got to work out these two really big pieces that day. And noticeably afterwards, I was able to sequence through big projects without the same kind of hitch of like being afraid at the last minute. And I was certainly less pain until even up till today. Now I never get any pain in my head. And I finally have worked through, and this is like 15 years later, I finally worked through the fears. And I don't get them anymore. And now I feel this great sense of elation, and I get to feel excited about doing things that are cool. It's been a journey, man, though. I've had to really work at it.
Wow. So you've had a direct experience of less fear, almost no fear now, less pain, almost no pain, where it used to be that you had a fear of death, that level of fear.
Yeah, and that came from, and this is a very common experience for children being born, especially today, because so many interventions are being used today. But the fear of death was more to do with the drugs that my mom was given, so she'd be able to tolerate the forceps.
Oh, okay.
And you know, every single baby that's born is totally different from another. So that's just my story. Especially like if you're born and you have a hard birth and you have a parent or parents who are really compassionate with you and take their time with you, you can work out a lot of it. I didn't get as much of that. I actually had to gird myself for a lot of challenges. So maybe if my family had been better supported, I would have worked that out earlier. So it's not a given that it has to be so terrible for the rest of your life, but it's very common.
And now you're doing ceremonial type work, divinations. Is that been a natural evolution for you of this work, or how did that come about?
I think so. I always say that, you know, if you come into this world feeling like you matter, you're going to treat everything else like it matters too. And you were saying earlier about how, you know, in that exercise, everybody was so excited. Well, if you have a village that knows how to honor rites of passage, particularly, you know, birth and even conception, you know, you're going to have a foundation in yourself that you belong here. And so I started to get really interested. Once I started to realize how much I matter, I realized how beautiful the world was, and how everything is alive. And it got me, just very inclined to listening to, like you said, the soul of things in everything. And for some reason, I found myself in a lot of places where I'm listening to elders and Indigenous healers, and I've just been very blessed to get a lot of lessons. So now I do bring that into my work.
Say that again. Now you
bring that into my work.
So you're miakalef.com, right?
That's right.
And what's the name of the colleague you mentioned in Holland?
John Turner, and the organization is, John is spelled Jon, and the organization is called the Whole Self Institute.
I love that. That's Whole Self Institute. Okay, so there's your books. It's not quite the right order of things, but I think it's pretty close. And if people are interested in exploring these topics, are there other recommendations? You have other websites or people to?
Actually, at the back of my more recent book, I've got a whole list of resources. of trainings you can take, institutions you can look at, and databases you can research, journals. Just off the top of my head, APA, APPAH.org, I think, or birthpsychology.com is an amazing resource in North America. It's sort of the hub of all the different kinds of practitioners and advocates and caring citizens who want to know more and connect about these issues. And you can even take a course online to learn how to advocate about the fact that we remember our experiences.
Cool.
And what are we doing about that in the world today.
Say that again. APPAH.
It's the short for the Association of Pre and Perinatal Psychology and Health.
So would it be appa.com basically? Or?
I think it is, yeah. Or if it's not, it's birthpsychology.com.
Birth psychology.
My colleagues there are just incredible at spreading the word, and I wouldn't have any of my readership really if it weren't for them. They're connected to people all over the world, and there's a European organization as well called the ISPPM. I can't remember what it's short for, but if you're in Europe, you can check them out too.
ISPPM as in Mary? Thank you. Anything else you want to share, just from anything that's alive for you on these topics to feel complete for now?
Well, when you get me talking about it, I get pretty excited. So I have to decide, that our time is up and rein it in. But I'm really grateful to you to be a fellow journeyer on the path of healing and self-knowing. And it's nice to be on your show.
Thanks. I'm delighted that you found some time for me, and yeah, this is definitely an area of interest for me. It's been for quite a while. To pick your brain. Okay. Thanks very much, Mia. I'll see you soon, and stay dry up there.
Yeah, you too.
Bye for now.
Thanks a lot.